Hey guys, tonight we begin in the shimmer of heat, the air dry as parchment, and the horizon blurred with dust. You stand at the edge of a world once thick with gold and mystery, where the sun rises not over ocean or forest, but over a sea of sand. The wind breathes across the Sahel with a voice like dry paper turning, and far in the distance past the thorn trees and bleached bones, something waits, a story of a kingdom that once weighed gold against salt and found them equal. You're going to need water for this one, and maybe a hat. But you probably wouldn't survive this place anyway, not with its heat, its hidden politics, and its unforgiving trade routes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your city and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing who else is up late, chasing strange history. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start not in a palace or a city, but in a whisper. Because for centuries, the Kingdom of Ghana lived more in rumor than record. Not to be confused with the modern-day country of Ghana, this kingdom stretched across what's now southeastern Mauritania and western Mali. It rose not from rivers or conquest, but from control of a substance so simple, so vital, that even gold bent to its will salt. You walk through red dust as legends float around you. Tales of a place so wealthy, the rulers fed their horses from golden troughs where merchants draped themselves in silks dyed deep with indigo and henna. A city of gold, but one where the gates opened only to those who understood the rhythm of the desert, the code of the trade, and the price of silence. Mainstream historians agree, Ghana, often called Ouagadougou by those who lived within it, was thriving by the 8th century. But it didn't rise from nothing. It grew from small Soninke-speaking communities, bonded by culture trade and a deep understanding of geography. They saw something others didn't, that between the salt mines to the north and the gold fields to the south, they could become a bridge and a gatekeeper. So you stand now at the edge of that bridge. Dust clings to your robes. A procession approaches from the north, camels, packed with salt blocks, their hooves soft against the sand. From the south, traders bring gold dust in hollowed gourds. You, of course, bring nothing but curiosity and a very poor grasp of camel etiquette. You pass the first traders near a baobab tree older than most cities. They nod silent lips, cracked from desert wind. One offers you a pinch of salt, and you realize it's not just seasoning, it's survival. Salt doesn't just flavor food here, it keeps you alive. In the heat without it, your body forgets how to retain water. So yes, gold was glamorous, but salt was sacred. Quirky detail. In some parts of West Africa, slabs of salt were used as currency. Big heavy rectangles carved from ancient deposits, sometimes weighing more than you do after a holiday feast. These salt coins were traded, hoarded, and sometimes stolen in epic silent heists that left no scrolls behind, just stories. And the stories keep coming. You hear of a king who kept his palace shaded by canopies of woven silk. Of a silent court where questions were answered not with words, but with the beat of drums. Of dogs with golden collars and soldiers with iron-tipped spears. The silence, that was policy. The Ghanaian kings were known to hold court in absolute quiet. Visitors spoke through intermediaries. Judgments were handed down with gestures, symbols, and long pauses. You're tempted to call it dramatic, or maybe just efficient, but historians still argue whether these tales are exaggerated, filtered through the lenses of Arabic chroniclers like al-Bakri, who never actually visited but reported second-hand accounts. Did the king of Ghana really sit surrounded by gold-stacked walls and perform silent justice with a flick of his bejeweled hand? Maybe, maybe not. But here's what we do know: people believed it. And belief in trade and politics is gold. You walk now through the open-air markets of what was likely Kumbi Saleh, Ghana's capital. dust swirls through the stalls. You pass vendors selling kola nuts, dyed cloth, and, of course, salt. You hear dozens of languages, see dozens of gods carved in wood, shaped in clay, or etched into the tattoos of passing strangers. The city was cosmopolitan long before that word had its passport. Muslims and animists traded side by side with two distinct quarters of the city, one for the indigenous rulers and one for the Islamic merchants who brought not just goods, but knowledge. You pause by a well shade, falling like a gift over your shoulders. And you listen. The city hums. Gold glitters on fingertips and foreheads. Salt sparkles like white fire in the sun. But beneath all that wealth, all that pageantry, is a truth even more enduring. Ghana understood value, and it understood timing. It rose in the space between scarcity and abundance, in the pause between need and offering. It mastered the in-between, so when people later called it lost, maybe they misunderstood. Maybe Ghana wasn't lost. Maybe it simply learned to trade visibility for myth. And tonight, you've traded your pillow for its memory. The heat clings like wet linen as you leave the market behind the scent of roasted millet and camel sweat, fading into the shimmer of mid-morning sun. You trail behind a caravan winding out of Kumbi Saleh, headed east along one of the kingdom's ancient arteries roads, without road signs, marked only by worn stones, and the knowledge passed between caravan leaders like Holy Scripture. The path undulates with the land cutting through flat savannas and low hills that drink in the wind, but give little else. You're not walking for sport. You're tracing the lines of trade, the arteries through which the kingdom pulsed, flexed and survived. Because Ghana didn't just hoard gold and salt, it moved them. It understood that wealth without movement is just a weight. So you travel now the way thousands once did, by foot, by hoof, by whisper. The desert doesn't shout, it murmurs. You listen. Camels shuffle past you, their long lashes catching grains of sand like eyelashes kissed by wind. Some carry salt. Others carry ivory textiles, even copper from distant lands. All of them are bound for places with names like Djenne Timbuktu and Tagaza. These aren't just destinations. They're points in a great map of trade culture and collision. And Ghana sat at the middle of it all, collecting tariffs like a polite toll booth with very large spears. Mainstream fact, the Kingdom of Ghana grew rich by taxing the flow of goods that passed through its territory. They didn't need to mine every ounce of gold or carve every block of salt. They simply took a cut, often 1 dinar per load of salt, entering 2 dinars for gold exiting. Not a bad gig when your kingdom lies at the crossroads of ancient commerce. You reach a rest stop, a patch of scrub shade beneath an acacia tree. A merchant offers you water from a goatskin pouch. It tastes faintly of leather and dust, but you drink gratefully. He speaks in Soninka gestures at your shoes and laughs. Apparently, they're not suited for desert travel. You're tempted to respond with something clever, but the heat has melted all your wit. Nearby, a younger trader unrolls a scroll inked with star symbols and strange roots that stretch from the Atlantic to the Nile. You lean closer and spot something unexpected, a stylized symbol at a junction near Ghana's heart, a circle with lines radiating outward, like a sun or a compass. You ask what it means. He shrugs. All roads curve eventually, he says. Quirky detail. Some merchants in West Africa used mnemonic poems chanted like songs to remember trade routes. These weren't written down. They were sung into memory, passed from father to son, mother to daughter. A map you couldn't steal, only inherit. You rejoin the caravan, the rhythm of footsteps syncing with your breath, and soon the land begins to shift. Trees thin, the soil reddens. The horizon flattens until it feels like you're walking across the edge of a drumhead. Welcome to the Sahel's outer rim, a land that doesn't promise comfort, only passage. And then you spot it. Salt mines. not the kind dug deep into mountains. These are shallow pits, long rectangular wounds in the earth, where men in wrapped cloth scrape white slabs from beneath the surface. The air smells like iron and sweat. You step carefully, wary of the crust that looks solid, but gives way like rotten floorboards. This is Tagaza, or something like it, and it feeds the kingdom's veins. Salt is life here, but it's also death. The work is brutal, blinding. Yet every slab carved is as valuable as a handful of coins. Even more valuable when you realize what it buys, not just food, but protection, influence, sometimes love. Yes, salt has bought more than meals in its day. Historians still argue whether the Ghanaian state controlled the mines directly or simply taxed those who worked them. Some claim miners were enslaved laborers. Others believe they were part of family groups who passed the work down like a grim inheritance. The truth is, likely both, depending on the decade and who held the spear. You pick up a chunk of salt, rough, crystalline, sharp. You imagine it once resting on a gold scale, perfectly balanced against dust, gathered from a king's throne room. And that thought doesn't seem strange. Not here. The caravan turns south again, moving toward the forest belt. The change is subtle at first, a few greener shrubs, a cooler breeze, a bird or two that actually sings. And then the land opens into savanna golden grass, stretching toward trees that look like they were drawn by children. Wide trunks, flat tops, shadows shaped like shields. You arrive at a village not far from the edge of this zone. Round huts with pointed thatch roofs, walls daubed with river mud and painted in ochre swirls. Children run barefoot, chasing a hoop made from bent branches. Women stir pots over low fires, steam rising with the smell of garlic millet and something sweet. The chief welcomes you with a nod. No ceremony, just a seat on a carved stool and a bowl of water so clean it sparkles. He speaks of the goldfields to the south of Bambuk and Bure and beyond, places where dust gleams in riverbeds and nuggets turn up in clay walls. These aren't myths, they're deposits. Real tangible wealth pulled from the land with baskets and patience. You realize something. This kingdom didn't trade gold for salt because it lacked gold. It did so because it could. Because it chose to be the fulcrum, not the hammer. So you rest under the trees that night, the sky wheeling slowly above, and you think of roots. Not just the paths people walk, but the roots of thought, of memory, of trade. Ghana's genius wasn't just in what it had. It was in what it understood. That value is relational, and sometimes it glitters white. You wake to the gentle percussion of pestles, thudding grain in wooden mortars, a rhythm older than the kingdom itself. The air is already warm, tinged with the scent of ash and tamarind, and the shadows stretch long across the village clearing. You stretch, joints creaking, and remember the ache in your feet, not just from walking, but from understanding. Because last night you didn't just rest, you absorbed. You rise brush dust from your tunic and follow the sound of voices toward the village center, where a group has gathered around a storyteller perched on a stool carved with crocodile legs. His robe is deep indigo, his hair knotted with beads, and his voice smooth as riverstone. You sit unnoticed, but welcome, and listen. He speaks of Dinga Sise, the semi-legendary ancestor of the Ghanaian kings, of the blacksmith kings said to command both fire and justice, of horses that danced without reins and gods that whispered into wells. His hands draw circles in the air as he talks, mapping myth, sketching legacy. This is how memory lives here, not locked in books, but kept breathing in story. Mainstream historical fact, the Kingdom of Ghana, also known as Wagadu, likely emerged as early as the 6th century CE, ruled by a hereditary monarchy of the Soninka people. Its strength lay not only in its economy, but in its systems of tribute, of law, of legacy. Its kings were seen as divinely touched, cloaked not just in gold, but in ritual. You learn that the king the Ghana, which was his title, not his name, rarely spoke to anyone directly. His words passed through intermediaries, his appearance was limited, and he held court surrounded by mystery. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about stature. A ruler too accessible is just another man with opinions. But a ruler shrouded in stillness. That's power. And the court itself, a layered place of robes, drums, messengers, and gold-threaded protocol. Foreign emissaries, especially from North Africa, were often stunned by the spectacle. Arab writers who traveled south or collected tales from traders described the Ghanaian court as dazzling a king who sits in splendor behind him, 10 pages holding gold shields and swords with hilts of pure gold. You try to picture it, a wide hall open to the wind, lined with columns carved in geometric patterns, the floor swept with palm fronds, incense burning in clay pots, the king seated high still as stone while advisors murmur and scribes record. And beyond the palace walls, a city alive with color and commerce. Historians still argue whether Kumbi Saleh, the capital, was actually two cities, one inhabited by the Soninka and another by Muslim merchants, separated by a few miles but deeply intertwined. Some say it was a single sprawling urban complex. Others point to Arabic descriptions, noting two distinct zones, a royal town and a merchant town. Either way, it worked. You finish listening to the storyteller, his tale winding down like a drum roll fading into sand. You thank him with a nod and move toward the edge of the village, where a group of women are spreading shea nuts to dry. They sing as they work harmonies in intervals that tug gently at your ribs. One of them, older than the trees behind her, calls you closer. She points to your satchel. You open it. Inside the stone, the seed, the parchment. She hums softly, then nods once as if to say, "Yes, I've seen these before. Just not with my eyes." You don't speak. You don't need to. That evening, a local priest leads you to a shrine carved into the belly of a low hill. The entrance is marked by concentric circles painted in ochre and ash. Inside, the air is cool damp with memory. He lights a small flame and traces its edge with his fingers, murmuring to something older than language. You step carefully around clay figurines, some shaped like birds, others like spirits mid-dance. This is not a place of fear. It's a place of calibration, a space where the boundaries between the earthly and the unseen are not erased, but respectfully blurred. Quirky tidbit. In many parts of West Africa, spiritual geography mattered as much as physical geography. Shrines, sacred groves, and ceremonial wells weren't placed randomly. They aligned with seasonal cycles, ancestral histories, and, yes, trade paths. A god that watches over gold will naturally demand proximity to where it is shaped. As the fire flickers, the priest lifts a bowl filled with fine sand. He pours it in slow spirals onto the floor, then smooths it with a flat stone until it forms a perfect disc. You watch, breath still. Then, without looking at you, he says, "Gold is a question. Salt is an answer. But the pattern. The pattern is both. You blink, you smile, you nod. He presses a pebble into the center of the sand circle, just once, and you feel the weight of it, not physical, but present. You sleep outside that night beneath a sky that pulses with ancient clarity, stars arranged not randomly, but with intention. You start to wonder if the constellations above Kumbi Saleh were read not just for direction, but for alignment, for symmetry, for affirmation. And somewhere in the dark, you remember something from a scroll back at the Abbey, a fringe theory barely footnoted. The Kingdom of Ghana may have practiced a spatial theology mapping power, not just politically, but cosmically. You fall asleep thinking of circles, of traders who walk in arcs, of kings who speak only through patterns, of stories that spiral out, then return again. Because this isn't just a tale of gold and salt, it's a map. And you've just begun to read it. You wake with sand in your eyelashes, and a crescent moon still clinging to the horizon. The sky is a soft gradient, now navy to silver to peach. Somewhere nearby, a rooster gives a half-hearted crow, as if even it knows dawn is just a suggestion. You sit up slowly, bones cracking like old scrolls, and stretch your arms toward the rising sun. This time, you don't head for the markets or the temple. You follow the path that curves out of the village, worn smooth by centuries of travel. This is the road the traders took, not the tourists. The real ones, the ones who carried kingdoms in saddlebags and measured worth not in coins, but in cargo weight and wind. You're walking the edge of the old salt road now. It doesn't look like much, just dirt and stone and the occasional scraggly bush. But if you close your eyes and listen, you can still hear it, the bray of camels, the thump of leather sandals, the dry hiss of salt blocks scraping against wicker baskets. Because here's the part you didn't learn in school. Salt wasn't just seasoning, it was life. Mainstream historical fact in West Africa, salt was so valuable, it was often traded ounce for ounce with gold. The Kingdom of Ghana sat between two mighty resources, gold from the forests to the south and salt from the Sahara to the north. They didn't mind both. They controlled the flow, and control meant power. You imagine the caravans rolling in across the dunes, long chains of camels bearing salt slabs cut from desert pans in Tagaza or Taudeni. The slabs were thick white, slightly pink in the right light, and each one could mean survival. Salt preserved food, rehydrated warriors, balanced sweat. In the sweltering heat of sub-Saharan trade routes, salt was literal currency. The king taxed it at both ends. Once when it entered, again when it left. And no one complained because the roads were safe, because the markets were full, because under the Ghana king system, everyone profited. You pause by a tree whose roots split the old path like a fork in a tail. Its bark is carved with symbols, some spirals, some dots, one that looks suspiciously like an old merchant's seal. You touch the wood gently. It feels warm. A young man appears on the road behind you, pulling a goat on a frayed rope. He nods in greeting, then points ahead and says, "You're walking with the ghosts." You ask what he means. He shrugs. They never stopped traveling, just changed shape. You thank him even though you're not sure why. Maybe because he's right. Further along, you find a half-buried stone, just a corner of it peeking from the dust. You kneel and brush it off, revealing what once was a marker, a smooth slab with faint carvings in ancient Soninka script. The words have faded, but you think they name a trading post, or perhaps a warning. Only fair trade crosses this road. Quirky detail. Some salt caravans were so long they took weeks to pass a single point. Entire communities would sprout up along the routes. Temporary markets, roadside sanctuaries, mini-cultures. A camel might leave Tagaza and not see home again for half a year. Traders carried charms, songs, and little leather pouches of desert herbs to fight off bad dreams and worse spirits. The road leads you to a hill. At the top you see it. Not a ruin. Not exactly, but something more like a memory etched in stone, low walls, shattered wells, pottery shards sun-baked into the ground. The bones of a forgotten outpost. You walk among them quietly, as if disturbing too much might send it vanishing for good. There's a platform here where once salt and gold were weighed and matched. No coins exchanged hands, just balance. A trader would place his salt step back and wait. The local merchant would respond with gold dust or nuggets, adjusting until both parties were satisfied. No words, just agreement. A system known as silent trade. Historians still argue whether this practice was based on linguistic barriers or cultural respect. Either way, it worked. For centuries, you sit on the platform's edge and reach into your satchel. The seed, the spiral stone, the parchment. You trace one of the drawn circles with your thumb, letting your mind fall into the rhythm. Gold for salt. Salt for breath. Breath for pattern. You close your eyes and try to imagine the exchange, the weight of it, the hush, the moment before trust is rewarded. And then you hear something. Not a sound, a shift. The wind moves in a strange loop around the ruined platform, curling through the broken walls like it's retracing routes no one else remembers. A camel's bray echoes far too clearly for an empty road. You open your eyes and see nothing. And everything. Because here's what no textbook tells you. Some places are too well worn to forget. You rise and walk the site in wide arcs, letting your feet fall in step with those who came before. Their dust becomes your dust. Their steps, your compass. At the far edge, a small heap of stones marks what might once have been a shrine. Not grand, just sacred. You kneel and add one more stone to the pile. Because why not? You're part of the story now. Might as well leave your mark. As the sun climbs higher, heat begins to rise in shimmering waves from the earth. You press the spiral stone into your palm and feel its cool weight. It steadies you. There are more roads ahead, more salt to trace, more gold to remember. But for now, you sit in silence just long enough to feel the rhythm return. The pattern, the pulse, the exchange that never ended. The sun hangs high now, casting hard shadows that turn every pebble into a miniature monument. You gather your things, satchel sandals, that small unspoken sense of awe, and begin your descent down the other side of the hill. The old salt road continues winding like a serpent through fields that once pulsed with the footprints of merchants' camels and stories. You're not alone for long. A dust cloud rises in the distance, slow but deliberate. Not a storm this time, it's people, a small caravan moving north. They pass you, steadily eyes shaded beneath dyed cloth feet, wrapped in thick layers of linen. A few children ride donkeys. One woman balances a basket on her head effortlessly. It's filled with dried dates and something wrapped in waxed cloth. You offer a wave. She gives a nod, then gestures behind her with her chin. You glance back. There's a wagon, wooden creaking, pulled by 2 oxen, and inside sits a wide-faced man with a tangle of jewelry around his neck. Gold, yes, but also carved bone coral and even a tiny salt crystal tied to a leather thong. He's smiling. You wait as they pass, and he calls out. Following the old path, eh? You nod. Good, he says. The road forgets those who don't. That sticks with you. Because roads have memory, don't they? Not just of trade and goods, but of power, of empire, and in this place, the kingdom that held this road. The kingdom you're walking through under a cross is one of the most quietly remarkable that history ever misplaced. The kingdom of Ghana. And no, not modern Ghana. That's a different story. The Ghana of gold and salt, the one that ruled these trade routes between the 6th and 13th centuries, was farther north. Nestled between the Senegal and Niger rivers, where trade met geography and turned sand into currency. Mainstream historical fact, the kings of Ghana controlled vast wealth, not just through gold mines, which they managed tightly, but through control of transit. Every merchant crossing their territory paid a toll. Every camelload of salt, every bag of textiles, copper, ivory, cola nuts. The king had a monopoly on gold nuggets. Only dust could circulate among the people. And their capital, Kumbi Saleh, a city split into one for the king and his court, the other for foreign traders, mostly Berbers. At its peak, the city buzzed with over 20,000 people. 2 mosques, a royal court, even a sacred forest. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of medieval West Africa, but with more camels and less Wi-Fi. You stop beneath a twisted acacia tree to rest and imagine the city as it once was. Sprawling clusters of mud brick homes, smoke curling from cooking fires, children playing beside baskets of millet and okra, traders shouting in multiple tongues, Soninka Arabic Tamazit, gold dust changing hands like glittering sand in the palms of gods. Quirky detail. Some accounts say the king kept dogs adorned in gold collars, who were trained to execute condemned prisoners. Scholars debate whether this is fact or traveler's flair, but still imagine the kind of power you have to wield for people to believe even your dogs wear jewelry. You sip water from your flask and consider the weight of such wealth, not just in metal or minerals, but in perception. The very idea of Ghana grew legendary beyond its borders. Arab historians like al-Bakri wrote of its riches, though he never visited himself. Word traveled farther than camels ever could. Historians still argue whether Ghana was a centralized empire or a federation of allied towns, you recall from a crumbling book once read by candlelight. The sources are vague, the ruins incomplete, the truth shimmering like heat on a desert path. But maybe that's fitting. After all, empires aren't just stone and soldiers. Sometimes they're systems. A balance, an agreement made over 1,000 campfires that gold would flow one way, salt the other, and both sides would pretend it was fair. You keep walking, and the ground shifts subtly under your feet. Softer here. Sandier. The wind picks up a little, bringing the smell of dust and dry grass. Off to your left, a wide depression in the earth reveals what might once have been a reservoir, or a quarry, or a forgotten cistern. You climb down into it just to feel the shape. It's cooler here. Quiet. The sound of your own breath seems louder than it should. And there on the far wall is a set of markings, faint, scratched deep. You trace them with your fingers. A triangle, a wave, a simple spiral. You know that last one. Alaric again. Or someone like him. Someone who passed through years or centuries before and felt the same pull. You add your own mark beside it. Not a spiral, a circle, simple, whole. And then you climb out, the sun pressing against your back like a silent witness. The road continues. This time it leads toward a low ridge, and beyond it, a shimmer in the air. You crest the rise and gasp softly, not because of what you see, but because of what you feel. Below lies the dry bed of what was once a bustling trade outpost, not grand, but wide, still faintly outlined in wind-carved ruins and half-sunken posts, a place where caravans met, where negotiations happened, where kings whispered behind veils. You descend slowly, carefully, kneeling once to pick up a shard of pottery painted with stripes. Someone once drank from this, laughed over it, maybe spilled tea on an important contract. You tuck it gently into your satchel. There's a circle of stones in the center. Could have been a fire pit. Could have been something else. You sit beside it and feel the weight of the salt and the gold, the road and the rhythm, the hum of a kingdom whose memory still rises with the wind. It didn't fall, you think. Not really. It dispersed, and here you are catching its pieces. The wind carries whispers now. Soft ones. Dry ones. The kind that don't really move your cloak, but find their way into your collar anyway. They rise from the ruins like memories lifting themselves out of dust. You close your eyes and let them pass through. No words, just feeling. Like the walls themselves are breathing in the sun and exhaling centuries. You move slowly now, feet padding through the hushed echo of what was once a marketplace. You can almost see them, traders weighing sacks of salt on bronze scales. Fingers dusted with crystal grit, haggling over units as if the world depended on the math. Which, in some ways, it did. Salt wasn't just seasoning in this world. It was preservation, currency, power. And for the people of the Ghana Empire, especially the Soninka, whose kings once ruled this desert borderland, it was worth its weight in gold. Sometimes more. Mainstream historical fact. The city of Tagaza, far to the north, was almost entirely made of salt. Literally, blocks of the stuff stacked like stone. Workers there cut it into slabs and loaded it onto camel caravans that creaked their way south toward the gold mines of Wangara and the kingdoms that controlled them. Guess who stood between the two Ghana? Not the flashy sword-swinging kind of kingdom, but the toll booth master, the middleman who got rich by keeping the routes safe. The negotiations smoothed the peace, enforced by just enough strength to make people behave, and just enough myth to make them think twice about cheating the system. You walk past a faint rectangular outline on the ground walls, long gone. Maybe once a storehouse or a meeting place? There's a tiny crescent carved into one cornerstone. Decorative, religious, directional. You don't know, but you touch it anyway, because something here still listens. The Ghanaian king, they say, held court surrounded by 10 horses draped in gold, a drum made of elephant skin, and a sword encrusted with decorations. He didn't speak directly to commoners, spoke through a page, and no one, not even the highest officials, spoke to him without first sprinkling dust on their heads as a sign of humility. Quirky detail. According to some Arab historians, the king's palace guards included dogs, yes again with the dogs decked out in golden collars. Apparently, royal pet fashion was very much a thing, and while the truth of that is debated, it speaks to the atmosphere of wealth and spectacle Ghana cultivated. But spectacle isn't forever. And here, standing in this sun-bleached silence, you can feel the shift. It starts with drought. No rain means less millet, fewer fish, more hungry mouths. Trade slows. People move. Cattle wander further to graze. Rivers shrink, and suddenly, the roots that once teemed with motion grow brittle, tired, quiet. Then come rivals. To the north, the Almoravids, a Berber Muslim dynasty, began pushing south. Their goal, control the Sahara trade and spread Islam. By the 11th century, they'd begun clashing with Ghana, not just with weapons, but with influence. Some historians say they sacked Kumbi Saleh in 1076. Others argue that the city was already unraveling, and the invasion was more a final nudge than a collapse. Historians still argue whether the Almoravids directly caused the fall of Ghana you recall from a late-night scroll session, or whether environmental strain, economic shifts, and internal fractures were already at play. It's probably both. Because empires rarely fall from a single sword. They fade. First, the court grows quieter. Then the traders reroute. Then the farmers move upstream. The gold mines start slipping from your grasp. The taxes shrink. The salt arrives late or not at all. And the once powerful tollkeeper finds the road passing around him. You reach a low hill beyond the market's edge and climb it slowly. From the top, the ruins stretch below like the bones of a forgotten animal, scattered, silent, still holding shape, but not life. Still something tugs at your thoughts. What if the kingdom didn't vanish? What if it simply shifted? There's a theory, quiet fringe but persistent, that Ghana didn't fall. It moved. That after the city weakened some of its royal lineage, helped form the basis for the Mali Empire to the east. That Ghana didn't die. It evolved, rerouted, renamed. And if you trace the trade routes just right, the road doesn't break. It bends. Down the line comes Sundiata, comes Timbuktu, comes Mansa Musa. But that's a story for another night. Today you sit on this hill surrounded by breeze and dust and history, and you feel what once was. You watch a hawk trace spirals overhead and wonder what the traders would have thought. The court scribes, the goldsmiths, the salt cutters. Would they have guessed we'd be here centuries later tracing their footsteps like prayers in sand, maybe? Or maybe they just nod and go back to work. Because the desert doesn't wait for legacy. Only memory. You draw a line in the dust beside you, then a second, then a third, forming a triangle. Not a symbol. Not really. just something you remember from a different journey. From a monk with chalk-stained hands who also believed in maps that weren't on paper. You smile, then rise. The sun has dipped low. The breeze is cooling, and the next leg of your path awaits. Following the trail of gold and salt shadow and spiral. One more step into the story that never truly ends. The sand shifts beneath your feet as you begin again. You've left Kumbisale behind, but it doesn't leave you. The quiet courtyards, the spiral shadows, the faint scent of trade and time. They linger like stories in the folds of your cloak. And now the road curves eastward, not paved, not marked, just followed like a trail of whispers. You pass low hills that look like sleeping lions, sparse brush bleached by sun, a single thorn tree leaning like it's tired of holding itself up. And then in the distance you see them, camels, a caravan, dozens of them, some swaying under loads of salt wrapped in hide bundles, others empty legs, long and slow eyes, half-lidded like philosophers on a stroll. Their herders wear cloaks stained by sun and sand, and a few nod as you pass as if you're part of the route now. Which, honestly, you are. One man gestures toward the horizon and mutters a name, Oalata, the new frontier. Because after Ghana began to fade, new powers took root. One of them Mali. Not the modern country, the empire. A rising force, hungry for gold, smart about salt, and capable of turning stories into strategy. And at its heart was something new, ambition wrapped in poetry. Enter Sundiata. He's a legend. A real figure blurred by myth, like someone scribbled his biography in starlight. Born lame, cast out, raised in exile, and then by charm strength, clever alliances, and a hefty dose of narrative flair, he rises to found the Mali Empire in the 13th century. Mainstream fact, Sundiata Keita united a group of smaller kingdoms and established Mali as a dominant force. Under him, the empire secured the gold-rich region of Wangara and gained control over the same salt routes that once fueled Ghana. Trade flourished, culture blossomed, and new cities rose like carved verses on the skin of the desert. Oalata, Timbuktu, Gao. Each became a star on the caravan constellation. You reach Oalata by sunset. It's quieter now, modern modest, tucked into the edge of Mauritania, but once it was one of the wealthiest outposts in Mali's trade system. Gold passed through its gates, salt stacked in its markets, and scribes filled its corners with written memory. You rest beneath a worn archway and imagine the clink of goods, the calls of traders, the rustle of parchment, quirky detail. Inualata early manuscripts were sometimes copied onto gazelle hide, not just parchment or paper. It was smoother, more durable, and gave the pages an almost translucent glow. Historians still argue whether the practice was driven by scarcity symbolism or sheer aesthetics. But you imagine those pages catching firelight like gold leaf. As you walk the town's edge, a child points to the stars and says, "The merchants follow those." You nod, because that's the secret no one tells you. The desert is a map. The wind writes it. The stars read it. You spend the night in a courtyard, strung with linen and surrounded by silence. Overhead, the moon drapes silver across adobe walls. And you remember something Sundiata is said to have declared. The world is old, but the future springs from the past. Which is either beautifully wise, or just a clever way to say, we're not done yet. The next morning, the path stretches north and west again, toward a name you already know, Timbuktu. Even saying it feels like reciting a spell. For most people, it's shorthand for the middle of nowhere. But you know better. Timbuktu was never nowhere. It was the somewhere everyone wanted to find. It's still early when you spot its first towers, soft tan walls rising like dunes frozen mid-climb. The Jingareber Mosque, with its wooden timbers jutting like ribs from the earth. mud brick walls shaped by centuries of sun and intention. You cross the gate and pause, because it's not just another city. It's an idea, a meeting point of trade scholarship, faith, and mystery. At its height in the 14th and 15th centuries, Timbuktu held one of the largest collections of manuscripts in the world. Libraries filled with law, astronomy, poetry, medicine, theology, written in Arabic Fulani Songhai. Some gold-leafed, some dog-eared, all precious, and you're standing where it all happened. You duck into a shade corridor where a young scholar practices reciting verses from memory. His teacher, wrapped in indigo robes, marks corrections in sand with a twig. No ink, no paper, just words and dust and sunlight. You sit quietly, listening to syllables rise like incense. Mainstream fact, by the time of Mansa Musa Mali's most famous ruler, Timbuktu had become a center of Islamic learning that rivaled any city in the Mediterranean world. Musa himself famously undertook a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, so extravagant in gold and entourage that he disrupted regional economies along the way. Fringe Tidbit One chronicler claimed he brought camels carrying 300 pounds of gold dust each. Whether that's true or just poetic inflation, the impression was clear. Mali was powerful, and Gold Mali had it. But Timbuktu's real wealth wasn't gold, it was knowledge. And standing here now, listening to soft chants, touching the mud walls, tracing old symbols carved into doorways, you understand what that means. Because gold gets spent, salt melts, but wisdom, that lingers. You follow a narrow path between gardens fed by underground channels, ancient qanats still whispering water in the dark. A boy waters mint from a wooden bucket. A woman shells peanuts in a doorway, singing softly to herself. And you stop by a carved stone that bears a spiral. Not dramatic, not huge, just quiet. Familiar. You trace it with your fingers, the ridges smooth under years of touch. And you think of Alaric, of chalk and cloisters, of the maps we carry and the paths we follow. The way every journey feels new, but loops through memory. Maybe the salt and the gold were just ways to move something deeper. Maybe trade was always about more than goods. Maybe the real route wasn't between kingdoms, but between people. You step into the sun, breath catching slightly in the heat, and prepare for the next bend in the road. Not forward, but deeper. The morning light in Timbuktu doesn't just arrive, it pours. Not like water exactly, more like syrup. Slow, golden, warm. It slips over rooftops, drips down alleyways. Pools and courtyard tiles still cool from night. You wake to it pressing through a carved wooden screen, casting patterned shadows on the floor, like a prayer you haven't learned yet. You sit up slowly. Your satchel leans against the wall, still dusty, still full. But it feels lighter. Or maybe you do. Outside, the city stirs. Traders unload woven baskets. Scholars sip tea beside stacks of manuscripts. A donkey brays. Somewhere nearby, someone begins reciting a poem about the moon. You don't understand the words, but you catch the rhythm. And that's enough. Timbuktu doesn't ask you to understand, just to listen. You head toward the market, not to buy, just to see. And you see everything. Salt slabs stacked like dominoes, glinting like frozen fire. Dates piled into pyramids, sticky sweet and humming with flies. Indigo cloth dyed so deep it drinks sunlight. A pair of musicians tapping on talking drums, sending messages you suspect only they truly hear. You follow the path northward, not to leave, just to wander. Beyond the walls, the desert flattens again. The wind kicks up spirals of sand, and the sky shifts from gold to pale, sharp blue. And then, rising like a mirage that forgot to vanish, you see it, Tagaza, the salt town, or what's left of it. Because here's the wild bit. This place, crumbling and bleached, was once one of the most valuable sources of salt in the world. At its peak, It sent thousands of tons southward each year. Slabs carved from deep pits, stacked on camelbacks, and traded weight for weight with gold. Let that sink in. Gold and salt. Equal. Mainstream fact in the trans-Saharan trade routes, salt was so vital, especially for preservation and health, that it literally rivaled gold in value. Caravans of hundreds of camels would travel up to 3 months to transport it. You crouch beside a collapsed salt wall and rub the grit between your fingers. It still flakes white, still stings the air with dryness. There are no grand monuments here, just ruins. Wind-swept silence. And yet, the bones of an empire lie under your feet. You remember a line from a merchant's journal you once saw: salt is the soul of the earth. Gold is its glitter. And now you're starting to understand. But salt didn't build itself, and neither did empires. So you follow the caravan route in reverse south again, past sleeping dunes, past acacia groves, past women pounding millet with rhythmic precision, and children chasing goats with bare laughing feet. The land pulses, dry, cracked alive. Then the land rises green this time. You reach Niani, capital of Mali in its prime, birthplace of Sundiata. Once a glittering administrative and cultural hub, now a quiet village with memories in the soil. You're welcomed by a woman with eyes like sun-warmed obsidian. She invites you into her shade, offers groundnuts, points to a cluster of stones half buried in the earth. Old palace, she says. Ghosts live polite there. You smile and step carefully around the stones, because politeness matters. Quirky detail. In oral traditions across West Africa, kings were often said to consult griots, musical historians, who carried centuries of knowledge in verse and melody. Not scrolls, not archives, just voice and rhythm. Some griots could recite 20 generations of lineage without notes. Historians still argue whether griots exaggerated to flatter their patrons or preserved true memory more faithfully than any scribe. But as one scholar once whispered, after hearing a griot perform, if that was flattery, it was divinely convincing. You listen to a griot now sitting cross-legged on a reed mat, his voice slow tuneful, edged with age. He tells of Mansa Musa's gold pilgrimage, of Sundiata's exile, of a time when every village lantern was lit by trade. His words fall like cloth on your shoulders. Familiar, comforting, slightly scratchy. When the story ends, he touches your palm and says, "You carry a question." You nod. He smiles. Good. Questions travel farther than answers. You walk to the river that night, the Niger ancient and winding. You sit where it curves like a sleeping serpent and watch the moon rise in pieces across its surface. Insects dance in the reeds. Frogs declare their territorial rights. And somewhere upriver, a canoe slides by without a sound. You remember the parchment in your satchel, the spiral, still folded, still unread by anyone but you. But in that moment, you feel its weight. Not heavy, just anchoring. Like a map, not meant for the eyes, but for the bones. You sleep beside the riverbank, head resting on your cloak. And when dreams come, they bring corridors of starlight and columns of salt and a throne carved from driftwood and memory. You wake to voices, fishermen laughing, a girl brushing sand from her feet, and the breeze whispering through baobab branches like someone tracing circles in the sky. It's almost time to go again, but not far, because before there was Mali, before Ghana, before the salt for gold caravans carved grooves in the earth, there was something else. Older, wilder, a kingdom whispered of only in fireside legends and half-sung prayers. And that's where you're heading next. Not because it's marked on any map, but because the spiral turns that way. The road to Ouagadougou doesn't begin with a signpost. It begins with a story, told in low voices, in marketplaces, around cookfires. in the lull between drums. You catch the name first in a lullaby sung to a child who refuses to sleep. Then again in a merchant's boast about ancestors from the time when Ouagadougou still stood proud. You lean in. Always the tone is wistful, reverent, but uncertain. Because here's the thing, Ouagadougou is not just a place, it's a question, and you are not the first to chase it. You begin by heading west. No grand cities greet you, just rust-colored trails, splintered goat paths, and the occasional lonely shrine made from piled stones and feathers. But the land breathes differently here. The wind carries stories. The trees lean like they're listening. Eventually, you reach a village that's not on your map. No signs, no borders, just 3 circular homes, a black dog asleep in the shade, and an old woman sorting millet with fingers like weathered roots. You ask her if this is near the old kingdom. She doesn't blink, doesn't pause. Which time she says, Ouagadougou has vanished 4 times. That's when it begins to click. Mainstream fact. According to the Soninke people's Dawsi epic, the kingdom of Ouagadougou fell not once, but 4 times, each collapse triggered not by war or drought, but by forgetting the sacred order, usually through greed or betrayal. Quirky detail. The kingdom's fate was said to be tied to a magical serpent named Bida. So long as sacrifices were made, Ouagadougou thrived. But when the tradition broke, the serpent cursed the land and the city vanished beneath the earth. You sit and listen as the old woman hums a rhythm older than iron, and she tells you what she remembers, not dates, not kings, but echoes. A city made of gold, she says. Walls like sunset, gardens of stone. Then, silence. You travel deeper into the Sahel. Red earth gives way to bare hills. Dust rises in curls. And then you see it. Not a city. A shimmer. Just enough to make you wonder if the heat is playing tricks. A bend in the rock. A circle of boulders arranged too perfectly to be chance. A carving on one, nearly worn smooth, still bearing the ghost of a spiral. You camp there, alone, but not lonely. Because Ouagadougou, like all vanished things, lingers. You wake at dawn to birdsong, and a sky so clear it feels carved. You sit in the circle. Place your stone at the center, and for one moment, the earth feels quiet in a deliberate way, like it's listening too. A trader stumbles upon you mid-morning. He's confused. He offers you water, asks what you're doing. You shrug. He nods and smiles like he understands. People don't walk this far by mistake, he says. What did you lose? You tell him you didn't lose anything. You're just trying to remember. He sits beside you, pulls something from his satchel. It's a piece of wood smoothed by hand, engraved with looping patterns. He says, I carved this from a baobab that cracked open in lightning. Inside the hollow was a spiral. He doesn't elaborate. You trade him a seed for it, the one with the triangle. As you part ways, he says, may your circles turn wide. You follow the path south now, where legends say the last fragments of Ouagadougou, hid in plain sight, buried in the hearts of smaller kingdoms. You visit a blacksmith who forges tools with decorative spirals on the handles. You meet a woman who sings her fields into ripening. You pass a shrine where pilgrims leave coins inside snail shells. Each time you feel a tug, not of memory, of recognition. These aren't relics, they're repetitions. The pattern echoes forward, not backward. Historians still argue whether the kingdom of Ouagadougou was real, or metaphor, whether its 4 collapses were historic cycles or poetic license, whether the serpent was a symbol, a fable, or something literal. But standing here under a tree, bent into the shape of a question mark, you decide the answer doesn't matter, because you feel it. The gold traded for salt, the silence after forgetting, the hush before return. That night you sleep under stars that seem sharper than usual. The wind makes the grass hum. And in your dream, you walk through a city made of mirrored dust and glowing lines. No guards, no markets, just doors that open when you breathe the right rhythm. And in the center, a throne carved with patterns you've drawn 100 times. Empty, not waiting for a king, waiting for a memory. You wake at first light, pack your things, and smooth the sand with your palm, not to erase your path, but to remind it to shift again, because nothing sacred is ever static. And the kingdom of Wagadu. It didn't fall, it folded, waiting for those who walk circles wide enough to unfold it again. The road home is not marked with stones or signs, it's traced in memory. And as you begin your journey back, wherever back is now, it feels less like a return and more like the next turn in a spiral. You no longer travel in straight lines. You follow shadows, song, a certain kind of silence. You stop more often too, not from fatigue, but from awareness. A curve in the hill catches your eye. A pattern in the riverbank's stones makes you pause. Once a hawk wheels overhead in a lazy circle, and you wait until it disappears before taking another step. You're not the only one walking differently. In a village carved into cliffs, you see a young girl drawing shapes in the dust with her toe. She doesn't notice you at first, but when she does, she nods solemnly, as if greeting a fellow traveler, a fellow rememberer. You offer her a smooth stone. She offers you a date. No words, but both of you smile. You reach a city bustling bright loud. You should feel disoriented. Instead, you start noticing the angles of buildings, a certain symmetry in how the market stalls form a hexagon around a single lamppost. The scent of spice feels familiar. Someone is humming a tune you don't know, but your heart sways to it anyway. A merchant calls out to you, says you look like someone who knows old things. You laugh, not because it's funny, but because it's true. You don't speak of Alaric, or Wagadu, or the patterns drawn beneath sandals and sky, but you carry them. In how you arrange your meals, in where you choose to sit in a crowded room, in the way your finger unconsciously draws loops on wood or stone or dust. A quiet rebellion, a soft preservation. Mainstream fact, long after the collapse of empires, their symbols often survive in art, in language, in ritual. The Roman eagle, the Viking knot, the Akan spiral, threads pulled forward across centuries, not always understood, but always present. Quirky detail. Some scholars believe parts of the Dowsey epic, the oral story of Wagadu, were only ever recited under moonlight, not because of superstition, but because the storytellers said, the moon remembered better than the sun. You start lighting your own candle before sleep, not for warmth, for memory. You find work in a garden outside the city. The pay is modest, the soil is stubborn, but you plant rows in curves. You speak to the seeds. You hum old melodies when no one's listening. And sometimes, just sometimes, the flowers bloom in perfect patterns you didn't quite intend, but feel right all the same. You keep the parchment tucked away, faded now, smudged at the edges, but still legible. You've stopped needing to look at it, but you never stop carrying it. And the spiral stone, you bury it, not in mourning, in faith, at the base of a tree that grows at an odd angle, half turning, like it's trying to see behind itself. You leave the pouch of seeds in the care of a boy who dreams of drawing the wind. He thanks you without words. You nod without goodbye. Because here's the truth, you were never meant to keep the pattern. You were meant to pass it. And as the seasons turn, and the city grows, and new stories rise from the earth like forgotten roots, you begin to see it everywhere. A mosaic in a bathhouse, a tattoo on a stranger's ankle, a cathedral window that glows like a compass rose when the solstice hits just right. It's not just memory now, it's rhythm. The kingdom of Wagadu is still gone and still present. Alaric is still silent and still whispering. And you are still walking, circles within circles, loops that don't repeat but rhyme. And maybe that's the point. Some kingdoms rise with golden armies. Others rise in how we walk, what we plant, what we remember. Some are built of stone, some are built of story. You sit one evening as the sky fades to copper and feel the weight of both. And in that hush, just before the lamps are lit, just before the world resumes, you hear it again. The pattern remembers. And so do you. So now, as you settle under your blanket or lean back into your pillow, let the story soften. Let the world of salt roads and golden echoes drift gently into your breath like the hush of a spiral drawn slow and true. You've walked far tonight. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Maybe by now you've already drifted off to sleep, and if so, we hope this story brought you peace of mind and helped you rest a little easier. Deep sleep makes life better, and we're truly happy to be part of that. Until next time, sleep well. You've earned it.